Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Hasan talked to billionaire candidate for governor in California, Tom Steyer, who jumped into the race. This is a crowded race, but pretty light on desirable candidates, to be honest. This is the race that Katie Porter is running in. The primary for Democratic candidate to be governor in California will be held in June, and then the actual election is in November, like the rest of the rounds of elections that's going to happen in America. And so whoever wins the Democratic primary nomination is likely to be the candidate. So there's still time for some other people to jump in, but time for that is definitely thinning. And the main contenders you have on the Democratic side would be Katie Porter, Eric Swalwell, and then now Tom Steyer. And there are other candidates that are genuinely better than those, but those candidates are polling very low right now. You know, maybe they'll have some kind of surge in the polls, but right now the race is set up so that one of those Democrats is probably going to win, or maybe some other prominent Democrat who jumps in. So Tom Steyer is genuinely becoming one of the most interesting / promising candidates in the race, which isn't great because he's not that great, but he did run in 2020 a relatively progressive campaign, but still moderating some of the ideas of, say, Bernie Sanders. He was against single-payer healthcare. He now is saying he's changed his mind on that, and he wants billionaire taxation, he wants universal healthcare, he wants abolishment of ICE, etc. So he's embracing more progressive positions like that, and he also is a billionaire who is saying, I'm not going to take corporate money, I'm not going to take PAC money. So on one side, he is part of this system and whatnot, but on the other side, one of the few types of people who can float their own entire campaign without taking any corporate donations, even through a general, would be a billionaire. That's kind of the Trump formula, although he took plenty of money from other people as well. Still, he got pretty far not having to bend the knee to different donors because he was floating himself through various deals and stuff like that. I think Tom Steyer's money is more legit than Trump's was when he ran, but you take my point. So Steyer's coming out with these more progressive positions. He's trying to differentiate himself, so that is the context with which he's talking to Hasan. He does a little bit of that, like, kind of pretending he doesn't know what words mean here, and you'll see that at the end. And I think the most egregious point in this interview, where he is equivocating about the idea of genocide in Gaza, gives a very bad answer on that, which Hasan does call him out for. So let's get into all this, talk a little bit about his positions, and then how these dynamics are going to kind of unfold into the country at large.
Who's also running, and he was running on a single payer, and you actually came out with ads against single payer, saying that this was a system that you had looked into deeply and that you thought it had not worked. What changed in your analysis
to make me change my mind?
To help you change your mind?
The facts. You know, so you should know, Hasan, I went to Stanford Business School, and they made this argument consistently, which I believed that basically capitalism and corporations were the way to drive down costs. No. And I want to make a distinction here. And I looked at what was going on in healthcare, and I looked at it over time, and I looked to see if that had happened one time. And, you know, when I was looking at it in 19, and I was talking to all these people who were bringing IT into the system and saying, this is going to flatten the curve, this is going to drop costs, blah, blah, blah. Nope, absolutely not true. So I said, look, this is something that is eating this state. I have to look at the facts honestly, and if I was wrong, I have to say so. And I was wrong. And what made me change my mind was looking at the facts and saying, this was the prediction of what was happening, absolute BS. So, okay, that didn't work. We absolutely have to, and let me get into why I think this is true and why I was wrong.
There's one that I obviously have to ask you, since you're a billionaire yourself. There's a wealth tax, or there's a billionaire's tax that's being talked about right now. Governor Gavin Newsom, because of his ambitions for higher office, has decided that the successful strategy of maybe one day becoming president, is to go against that. And he's actively petitioning against that. What is your assessment on the billionaire's tax?
So let me start by saying I'm in favor of a different tax structure where billionaires pay more money. And I'm not equivocal about that. Absolutely. I started by saying we have a tax structure that makes no sense. And in fact, I'm specifically in favor of one where the big corporations and the richest people pay more. Full stop. The billionaire's tax that specifically people are collecting signatures for, in my mind, has some specific issues with it. And where I feel like if we're going to redo the tax structure, we should do it right because we're going to own it for a long time. This is a one-time fix.
What are your issues with the billionaire's tax as it stands?
This is a one-time fix. It's not, when I'm talking about closing the corporate real estate tax loophole, that's every year. That goes on. It raises more money and it goes on forever, and it's there. This is a one-time tax.
Why not both?
Well, let me keep going back because there's a way to do this tax that is different. And the second thing that's true about this tax is, I don't know if you've looked at how it distributes the money, but it distributes the money in a way that is, well, I'll say, doesn't include in a meaningful way education, doesn't include a lot of the other priorities in this state.
Where is it going in the distribution that you have an issue with?
90% of it goes explicitly to healthcare. And the point is, do we need the money in healthcare? Yes. Do we need the money everywhere else? Yes. And so to a very large extent, what I'm saying is, if it's a question about revenues, which I agree with because we do have a shortfall and we should have this tilted in this way.
So you're saying you want to tax billionaires further than this tax goes and distribute it?
I'm saying I want to do it in a way that works for the state. And the concept I'm behind, but the way this works, it seems to me, has actual structural issues that we can do much better.
I do want to ask you about ICE.
Okay.
So when you were a hedge fund manager, your firm invested $90 million in private prisons and detention centers. And I want to know how that aligns with your current stance on ICE, because from what I understand, you're in favor of ICE abolition.
So that happened 22 years ago, and it was a big mistake. And I realized it was a big mistake and sold it over 20 years ago.
Okay.
And the reason I sold it was for the reason you're saying. And it was more than a mistake. And it was this. It was a wake-up call that I was in the wrong place. I don't think anybody's really feels sorry for the people who were running Iran because they were terrible to their own people. But the truth is, what we're seeing is a world where the point is, might makes right, and we'll do whatever we want. And if you don't like it, that's just too bad. And there's no sense of justice in it. And of course, that is a terrible step. And we've seen it in Gaza, but we've seen it very broadly. And that's something that's ongoing. And is that something which, of course, I'm completely opposed to? Of course, I'm completely opposed to that.
Okay, so that's almost identical to what I don't mean to. I don't mean to push you, but that's almost identical to what Gavin Newsom said to Ben Shapiro when Ben Shapiro said, "Do you think there's a genocide going on in Gaza?"
What I think is this: I think that this Israeli government has been trying to take over the entire country and expel the Palestinians and take over the whole thing, kit and caboodle. And that's what they've been doing for a long time. It's absolutely wrong. There's no question there. And they're willing to commit war crimes to do it. That's what I think. And that's been going on for a long time.
So you don't want to you're not committing to the term genocide.
I don't actually, I think, you tell me if this is what it means, because it's sort of like socialism, if you excuse my saying so. Do I think they're trying to kill all the Palestinians? No.
No,
I think I don't. I think they're trying to expel the Palestinians from the country, that they're trying to have one state.
That would be genocidal intent.
I don't know what that is, but that's what they're trying to do.
All right, so the first thing I want to say is that when they're talking about the wealth tax towards the beginning of this conversation, Steyer actually misunderstands a little bit. So they're talking about two separate things, because there is a ballot initiative in California to do a wealth tax on California billionaires that is one time, and they are fighting to get the amount of signatures needed to get on the ballot, which would then be a ballot measure, I believe, in November. So that is an ongoing fight. That is the billionaire tax that Gavin Newsom said he would vote against were it to pass. So is that true? Probably not. Honestly, if it ended up passing, he probably would not veto it. But he said that he would because he wanted to deter it, because he's trying to run a different style campaign. So when Hasan brought this question up, he's actually talking about a measure introduced by Bernie Sanders and Ro Khanna in Congress to do the same thing, a 5% wealth tax on all billionaires, but that would be recurring. It would be every year, an annual wealth tax. So that one would go not only towards healthcare, but also stimulus checks to all Americans, childcare, etc. So it's an ambitious bill, not expected to pass, but expected to hopefully reshape some of the dynamics in Congress, being sponsored by Ro Khanna, who's one of the few Democrats who has managed to get anything done in Congress at the moment, as well as Bernie Sanders, who is great at taking bold positions like this, but has not had as good of a track record for getting them passed. So this might not be a bill that passed, but like I said, it may be a sticking point that candidates both in the 2026 election and then beyond are going to have to answer to. But Tom Steyer is talking about the proposal in California and is essentially saying that he thinks the fact that it's a one-time thing is a problem, and that is the one that he's referring to almost all of the funds going to healthcare. 90% of that money collected would go towards expanding healthcare and then a little bit for other things. So Steyer is saying that he does not think that's the right way to allocate those funds, and also that it should be recurring. Now, he's arguing for closing a tax loophole, which he says would raise more money, be more effective. So that, I think, is the first sticking point here, because while I think there's a fair argument to make that, the billionaire tax hike that they're trying to do in California might not be enough, or maybe the funds aren't allocated properly. But I think that him being the billionaire who's trying to differentiate himself from the other candidates, I don't know that it makes sense for him to quibble about which wealth tax he likes and which one he doesn't. Kind of the whole point of a wealth tax is that it's not up to billionaires what it looks like, how it's done, but rather this is just something that the people are going to decide on. So that is why a ballot initiative to get a wealth tax like that passed is a great idea. And I think to the end of healthcare is a perfectly fine thing to allocate those funds for. However, on the national stage, the bill that Bernie and Ro Khanna are proposing is much more robust in terms of where it wants to allocate those funds. So I think rather than saying, well, I don't want to do this billionaire tax, but let's close the tax loophole, there's an argument for that. Hasan says, why not both? Which he kind of laughs off, Tom Steyer does, because it racks up. And to be frank, let's say both of these bills advance, I don't exactly know how they would be expected to fold into each other. Maybe you do one 5% tax and then you do another one, or maybe the Bernie and Ro Khanna bill is meant to extend it to make it an annual thing since it is only one time. I guess that would have to be addressed as these bills go on. But the point is that any bill moving in that direction that claws back wealth from billionaires and puts it towards something like healthcare, frankly, it's cool to have all this stuff about stimulus checks and all these different programs that you want to do. And Ro Khanna and Bernie are saying that this would raise trillions of dollars just doing this 5% across the board wealth tax. But the reality is it might make more sense to allocate those type of funds towards something more specific, like a really aggressive approach to expanding healthcare programs, which is what the California ballot initiative is more about. So I think it's a little bit squirmy for Tom Steyer to be quibbling about what type of billionaire wealth tax that he likes, especially considering it's not guaranteed that this ballot initiative that he is referring to is actually going anywhere. I think it makes sense to support it anyway. Why? To differentiate yourself. This is, again, the bill that Gavin Newsom said that he would veto. So then for you as the billionaire to also come out and say, well, I don't know about this particular, we should close this loophole, you're really just invoking the idea of other loopholes, right? If you close one loophole, are they going to find another one? Doesn't it make sense to just pass a law to say we're going to tax these people a certain amount? It's just a little bit more straightforward in terms of messaging. And he says this thing about ICE. He says he divested early on from these private prison investments that some hedge fund he was a part of had invested in. He said this was against my morals and it was a terrible idea, etc. But then when Hasan brings up the idea of divestment in Israel, boycott, divest, sanctions, he gets a little bit more mealy-mouthed, doesn't really like the idea of talking about divestment from Israel, and then they get onto the subject of genocide. So Steyer is trying to say, well, this is mostly about money and politics, right? It's about money controlling politics. So if we attack PACs like AIPAC, JPAC, or other corporate PACs, that's essentially a proxy for this problem of Israel and how much control that they and their politics have over American politics. And Hasan correctly says that that's a little bit of a distraction. Now, there's a lot of truth to it, that you can solve a lot of the problem by going the corporate PAC route and trying to not only not take that money, but outlaw it. But also, you're kind of sidestepping the issue of Israel committing a genocide using our weapons. And one of the main things that Steyer should want to differentiate himself from other Democrats about is that particular issue. The fact that he's missing on that is a big deal, because it is becoming more popular among Democrats to say, I'm not going to take PAC money. It's even becoming a pretty mainstream position to say, I'm not going to take AIPAC money, which is honestly nuts. But to not address the core issue that Israel has been committing a genocide, he says other things. He says war crimes, and then he gives this kind of caveat of saying, well, what I think they're trying to do is create a one-state solution by pushing everybody who's of a different ethnicity, all the Palestinians, out. He wants to remove them. Do I think they're trying to kill them all? No, I don't think that. But I think they're trying to push them all out. So Hasan says that's basically genocide. It's ethnic cleansing, etc. And that definition could, in fact, fold in with genocide, although they're not exactly the same thing. And Steyer keeps saying this thing of, I don't know what that means. He even says it again later. I don't know what the word genocide means. And again, I guess he's specifically saying in the sense that Israel is only trying to obliterate every Palestinian they can, like that's the kind of maniacal intentions they have. Steyer is saying that he doesn't think that. He just thinks they're trying to remove them from the land. I disagree. I think they want to kill as many of them as they possibly can, and they certainly have done that, and they've lied about the amount that have ended up being killed. And they also want to ethnically cleanse the area, push them out, and take over the land. So this quibbling, again, about the language of genocide, even at the big age of 2026, is a huge problem with these Democrats. And I even had a conversation with a guy on the bus one time, believe it or not, about Kamala Harris. This was after the election, but I was saying that, you know, all she had to do was say arms embargo on Israel and say clearly what people could see, which is that this is a genocide, and she would have maintained a lot of the support that she had early on when she stepped into the race. And this guy, who is not a liberal, he's like more of a conservative type of guy, but he was saying Kamala Harris couldn't say that because of, you know, the international bodies had not come out and called it a genocide yet. So Kamala Harris wasn't able to say that. And that's the problem, because if those bodies did end up designating it as a genocide, which they have, why couldn't Kamala Harris come out and just say that that's what it is? Why can't Tom Steyer just say, why can't you have an opinion on this? Because people who are going to be voting for you or not voting for you, they have an opinion. They have a strong opinion about what Israel's doing in Gaza, even still to this day, despite the fact that what we're seeing there is different from what we were seeing during the 2024 election. It's still a part of the same process. And that process is to eradicate not just a certain kind of people from that land, but by doing so, they are trying to eradicate the Palestinian people. They are trying to make it so that Palestine, as a concept, as a people, as a history, does not exist. If the word for that isn't genocide, I don't know what that word should ever be used for. So that type of moral clarity is just going to be necessary from these Democrats. And I think that it's good that Tom Steyer is differentiating himself. I hope that Hasan's getting into it with him a little bit about China, which frankly, I don't think he made any objectionable points, but I think that, you know, a guy like Tom Steyer isn't necessarily going to be expecting to be confronted with conversation about China and about the merits of China's economy from a dude like Hasan Piker. And I think that they might have a tendency to look at that and say like, whoa, this is scaring me a little bit. This is a little too far left for me. Maybe it distracted from this conversation a little bit. So when they got back on track, it's possible that Steyer is going to be able to write off some of this stuff that Hasan is saying about genocide as like, okay, this is what the far left thinks. And that's a huge risk, because there are a lot of people in the middle ground, even people who don't associate as being left, don't have anything to do with the Democratic Party or anything like that, who when you say the words genocide in reference to what Israel's doing, they're going to recognize that as you differentiating yourself. And what's the point of having all these billions of dollars to throw at the race if you're not able to take principled positions like that? So, just a warning to that guy that is going to create a problem. If you're going to continue to be mealy-mouthed about that issue and not be able to take a strong stance on something like boycott, divest, and sanction, then you're going to lose a lot of the support you're looking for from progressives. And most of that is not going to go away. Some of that momentum might go away over the next year, but especially with Iran and that conflict continuing, and people are going to continue to be frustrated by Israel's influence in politics. And it's not going to be just enough to say, I won't take AIPAC money, I won't take PAC money, because people are smart enough to see that there's something deeper going on there. And if you don't fill up that space by saying this is Israel manipulating American policy because American weapons is the only thing that can back up the genocidal colonial project of Israel, if you can't say that, then people are going to go to more anti-Semitic places, and the Democratic Party is going to lose its ability to capture that momentum. We saw that happen with Kamala Harris. We cannot allow it to happen more. So Tom Steyer, I don't know if he has the juice. As of right now, it looks like he's one of the more promising leading candidates, so we'll see what happens.
Me too close to, too much to do. The mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.